Good evening, dear travellers, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. I am Adam, and tonight we continue our journey through the legendary lands of Middle-earth, where tales of courage, creation, and farewell await. This evening we begin with the last alliance of Elves and Men, a tale of unity forged in the face of darkness, where the greatest forces of Middle-earth stood side by side against Sauron, the Dark Lord, in a final, desperate attempt to preserve their world. From there, we travel back to the very beginning, to the creation of the Elves by Ilúvatar, a story of wonder and divine purpose, as the Firstborn of Ilúvatar awaken under the stars and begin their journey upon the earth. Finally, we conclude with the departure to the Undying lands, a tale of bittersweet farewell as the Elves sail westward, leaving the lands of Middle-earth for the timeless shores of Valinor, where they will find peace beyond the reach of sorrow. Allow these ancient legends to transport you, dear listener, to a time when wonders and magic filled the world, a place where love, valor, and wisdom were etched into every mountain, every river, and every star. But before we begin, allow yourself to step into a realm beyond the boundaries of time, a place where ancient forests and mist-shrouded mountains hold the secrets of ages long past. The air around you feels different, filled with the fragrance of pine and earth, and a distant whisper of elven song that echoes softly through the trees. This is Middle-earth, a land of beauty and mystery, where every forest glade and river's edge tells a story etched into the very fabric of the land. You walk along a forest path blanketed in soft moss, each step quieter than the last, as if the forest itself is listening. Towering trees surround you, their silver leaves shimmering in the pale light of stars overhead. The night sky stretches wide and endless, dotted with constellations that seem to tell tales of bravery, love, and loss, stories that have been whispered here for countless generations. In the distance, the faint glimmer of a hidden elven city appears through the mist, its tall, elegant spires reaching up toward the heavens, carved from stone and silver by hands that remember the dawn of time. Somewhere beyond, rivers run clear and deep, reflecting the stars and the gentle glow of the moon as they wind their way through valleys and ancient woodlands. As you walk further, the sounds of Middle-earth enfold you. The soft rustling of leaves, the quiet song of the wind as it travels through the branches, and the distant call of a night bird echoing from a hidden perch. The land feels alive, filled with a quiet magic, a pulse of ancient power that stirs the soul. Let the wonders of Middle-earth surround you, transporting you to a place where legends breathe and dreams unfold. Here, within this timeless land, our stories await. The last alliance of Elves and Men. Chapter 1. A shadow grows in Middle-earth. In the waning years of the Second Age, Middle-earth stood on the brink of darkness. For many years, peace had reigned across the lands. The mighty kingdoms of men thrived, their white stone cities rising majestically from the plains. In the west, the elves lived in their forested realms, their songs echoing through the trees. Yet, beneath the surface, a shadow stirred, growing stronger with each passing day. Sauron, the Dark Lord, once the most trusted servant of Morgoth, had returned to power. Though he had been defeated many years ago, he had never truly been destroyed. In secret, he gathered his strength, forging a new army in the fires of Mount Doom and creating a weapon of unparalleled power, the One Ring. With this ring, Sauron could control the minds of others, bending them to his will, and he planned to use this power to enslave the free peoples of Middle-earth. At first, Sauron's return was but a whisper. A rumor passed from village to village. But soon his dark influence began to spread, reaching even the farthest corners of the land. Orcs and other foul creatures, twisted by Sauron's malice, began to emerge from the shadows, raiding villages and slaughtering innocents. The peaceful lands of Middle-earth grew uneasy, and a sense of dread settled over the hearts of men and elves alike. But all was not lost, for in the face of this growing darkness, an alliance was forming, an alliance that would be the last hope for the free peoples of Middle-earth. Chapter 2. The Gathering of the Last Alliance. It began with a single spark of hope, a conversation between two great leaders. In the realm of Rivendell, high in the misty hills of Eriador, Elrond, the elven lord and keeper of wisdom, convened a council. Messengers had arrived from all corners of Middle-earth, bearing grim news of Sauron's growing power. Yet amidst the gloom there was a glimmer of light, a plan to unite elves and men once more in a great alliance, to stand together against the rising tide of darkness. Elrond stood upon the steps of his great hall, the wind rustling the golden leaves of the trees around him, his gaze turned toward the distant mountains. His heart was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come, but he knew that if Middle-earth were to survive, the elves and men must set aside their differences and fight as one. Hope is kindled not in the absence of darkness, but in the hearts that rise to defy it, Elrond said, his voice strong and filled with purpose. His words spread through the gathered elves like a flame, igniting their determination. From the northern kingdoms of men, Isildur and his father Elendil arrived at the council. They were the lords of Númenor's survivors, the descendants of a great and noble line. The kingdoms they had founded, Arda in the north and Gondor in the south, were among the mightiest realms of men, and they had long stood as a bulwark against the forces of evil. But even they knew that they could not stand alone against Sauron's might. When Elendil and Isildur arrived in Rivendell, their presence was met with respect, for these were men who had faced many battles and hardships, and yet their spirits remained unbroken. They walked tall among the elves, their eyes burning with a fire that spoke of their readiness for the battle to come. "Let us bind our fates together, as we once did in the days of old," said Elendil, his voice deep and resonant. "We stand as brothers in arms, united by a common cause. Together we shall face the shadow, and together we shall cast it down." It was a momentous decision, the gathering of the last alliance of elves and men. In that hall, beneath the stars and trees of Rivendell, elves and men pledged their swords, their lives, and their hearts to one another. The bond between their peoples, forged long ago in the wars against Morgoth, would be renewed in the face of Sauron's evil. The elves, led by Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, and the men, led by Elendil and his son Isildur, swore to march together to the very gates of Mordor. Chapter 3. The Long March to Mordor. The march of the last alliance was one of the greatest feats ever undertaken by the free peoples of Middle-earth. Thousands of warriors gathered under the banners of their lords, elves clad in gleaming silver mail, their banners shimmering in the wind, and men bearing the proud standards of their kingdoms, their faces grim but resolute. From Rivendell, the great host set out, winding its way through the forests and plains, across rivers and mountains. It was a journey that took many months, and along the way the alliance grew as more elves and men joined their ranks. Dwarves, too, came from their mountain halls, bearing great axes and hammers, eager to take up the fight against Sauron. The journey was long and arduous, but there was a sense of purpose that bound the alliance together. The warriors marched with their heads held high, their steps steady, for they knew that they were marching not just for themselves, but for the very future of Middle-earth. As the host crossed the wide plains of Eriador and entered the lands of Rohan, the wind swept through the grasses like a whispered warning of the battle to come. Nights were spent around campfires, the warriors talking in hushed tones as they sharpened their blades and mended their armor. The stars above were bright and cold, and many among the Alliance looked to them for guidance, wondering if the Valor, the guardians of the world, were watching their journey. Among the elves, there was a quiet strength, a wisdom born of their many years on Middle-earth. Gil-galad, the High King, was a towering figure of authority, his deep blue eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. He knew that this march was not just a battle for the present, but for the future of all peoples. The elves, long-lived and patient, were willing to give everything for that future, even if it meant the end of their time in Middle-earth. Isildur and Elendil, father and son, marched at the head of the host of men. Isildur, young and passionate, was determined to prove himself in the coming battle, but he was also filled with a sense of destiny. He had seen in his dreams the fires of Mount Doom, and in those fires he knew that the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. And so, the last alliance marched onward, through fields and forests, their eyes ever fixed on the distant land of Mordor, where Sauron awaited them. Chapter 4. The Siege of Barad-dûr. After many months of marching, the last alliance finally reached the borders of Mordor. The land before them was a desolate wasteland, scorched and blackened by the fires of Mount Doom. The sky was dark, heavy with ash, and the air itself seemed to tremble with the presence of evil. Barad-dûr, Sauron's dark tower, loomed in the distance, its black spires reaching toward the sky like the claws of some great beast. The armies of the last alliance stood at the foot of the Black Gate, the massive iron doors that guarded the entrance to Mordor. For a moment there was silence, an eerie stillness that settled over the battlefield, as if the very earth itself were holding its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the gates of Mordor swung open, and Sauron's army poured forth. Orcs, their grotesque forms hunched and twisted, swarmed across the plain like a tide of darkness. Behind them came the creatures of Morgoth's ancient designs, trolls, wargs, and other foul beasts, their eyes glowing with malice. Towering over them all were the black-armored captains of Sauron, their swords gleaming wickedly in the dim light. The battle had begun. The clash of swords and the roar of battle filled the air as the armies of elves and men met Sauron's forces head-on. Gil-galad, resplendent in his silver armor, led the charge, his spear Aeglos flashing through the ranks of orcs like lightning. At his side fought Elendil, the great sword Narsil in his hand, cutting down the enemy with every stroke. For days the battle raged, the ground beneath them soaked with blood, the cries of the wounded rising above the din of battle. The forces of the last alliance fought bravely, but Sauron's army was vast and relentless, and the toll on both sides was great. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the alliance pressed on. Elves and men stood shoulder to shoulder, their determination unyielding as they fought against the relentless waves of Sauron's forces. Their banners, though tattered and stained with the blood of their comrades, still flew high, symbols of the unity and courage that bound them together. Each sword swing, each arrow loosed, and each cry of defiance echoed with the hope that Middle-earth's future could be saved from the dark grasp of Sauron. Gil-galad, High King of the Elves, was a shining figure amidst the chaos, his spear Aeglos cutting through orcs and trolls alike. His movements were swift, precise, and deadly, his long years of battle-honed skill on full display. At his side was Elrond, his young herald, fighting valiantly, ever at the ready to aid his king and mentor. Elrond's heart swelled with pride for his people, but also with sorrow, for he knew that even victory here would not come without a terrible cost. On the other side of the field, Elendil, the tall and noble king of men, wielded Narsil, his great sword, with strength and purpose. His blows were like thunder, felling creatures of shadow and flame, carving a path through the darkness. Beside him, Isildur fought with the passion of youth, determined to honor his father's legacy and prove himself in this great battle. Father and son moved together as one, their bond unbreakable, their purpose clear, to stand against Sauron, no matter the cost. The battle raged for weeks, each day bleeding into the next as the sky above remained choked with ash and fire. The plains before Barad-dûr were littered with the bodies of the fallen, and the air was thick with the stench of death. But the last alliance did not falter. For every warrior that fell, another rose to take their place, driven by the knowledge that their fight was just, that they were standing against the greatest evil Middle-earth had ever known. As the siege wore on, it became clear that the alliance had the strength to match Sauron's forces. Slowly but surely they pushed back the tide of darkness, inching ever closer to the dark tower of Barad-dûr itself. But the true test had yet to come, for Sauron had not yet revealed himself. Chapter 5. Sauron's Descent. In the final days of the siege, the fires of Mount Doom blazed higher, and the earth beneath the battlefield trembled as though the land itself was recoiling from the evil that emanated from Barad-dûr. The armies of the last alliance had fought their way to the very gates of the tower, but even as victory seemed within their grasp, a terrible darkness fell over the battlefield. From the gates of Barad-dûr, Sauron emerged. Clad in black armor that gleamed like obsidian in the fiery light, Sauron was a towering figure of malice and power. His eyes, burning with the light of the One Ring, glowed like embers as he surveyed the battlefield. In his hand he held a massive mace, its weight heavy with the promise of death. As he strode forward, the very ground seemed to quake beneath his feet, and a shadow spread across the field, darkening the hearts of even the bravest warriors. The sight of Sauron filled the armies of the last alliance with dread, for they knew that their true enemy had now come forth. The elves and men who had fought so valiantly were now faced with a foe beyond anything they had ever imagined. Sauron was no mere warlord. He was a Maya, an ancient being of immense power, corrupted by Morgoth and driven by an insatiable lust for domination. Gil-galad and Elendil, undeterred by the Dark Lord's presence, stepped forward to meet him. They knew that the fate of the world rested upon their shoulders, and though the sight of Sauron filled them with unease, they stood firm. A great silence fell over the battlefield as the three leaders faced each other. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath, the weight of destiny hanging in the air. And then, with a roar that shook the heavens, Sauron attacked. The battle that followed was one of legend. Sauron's mace swung through the air like a whirlwind, each blow carrying the force of a thunderclap. Gil-galad, quick and agile, danced around the Dark Lord's strikes, his spear flashing like starlight as he sought openings in Sauron's armor. Elendil, tall and mighty, met Sauron's blows head-on, Narsil ringing out with each clash of steel. But Sauron was relentless. Though Gil-galad and Elendil fought with all their strength and skill, the power of the One Ring made Sauron nearly unstoppable. His blows came faster and harder, and the ground itself seemed to tremble with each step he took. Gil-galad was the first to fall. Sauron's mace struck him with a force so great that the High King was thrown to the ground, his body broken, his spear falling from his grasp. Elendil, filled with grief and rage, redoubled his efforts, his strikes fueled by the knowledge that if Sauron was not stopped here, all of Middle-earth would fall. But even Elendil, with all his strength, could not withstand the power of the Dark Lord. With a mighty blow, Sauron struck Elendil down, Narsil shattering beneath the weight of the Dark Lord's mace. Elendil's body crumpled to the ground beside Gil-galad's, and for a moment it seemed as though all hope was lost. But Isildur, Elendil's son, was not far away. Chapter 6. The Taking of the Ring. Isildur had watched in horror as his father and Gil-galad fell before Sauron's might. His heart was filled with grief, but also with a burning desire for vengeance. With a cry of fury, Isildur rushed forward, the broken shards of Narsil clutched in his hands. Sauron, towering above him, turned to face the young prince, his eyes blazing with malice. But Isildur, driven by both his love for his father and his hatred for the Dark Lord, did not falter. As Sauron raised his mace to strike, Isildur leapt forward, and with the broken blade of Narsil, he struck. The blade, though shattered, found its mark. Isildur's strike cut through Sauron's armor, severing the hand that bore the One Ring. With a scream of rage and pain, Sauron stumbled, the power of the ring leaving him as it fell to the ground. The Dark Lord's body crumbled, his form dissipating like smoke in the wind, and the battlefield fell silent. Sauron was defeated, but his essence, bound to the One Ring, was not destroyed. As Isildur stood over the fallen body of Sauron, his eyes were drawn to the ring, gleaming in the dirt at his feet. It was a simple band of gold, yet it seemed to shimmer with an inner light, calling to him, whispering promises of power and glory. In that moment, Isildur felt the weight of destiny upon him. He knew that the ring was the key to Sauron's power, that if it were destroyed, the Dark Lord would be vanquished forever. But the ring had its own will, and its voice was seductive. Instead of casting it into the fires of Mount Doom, Isildur bent down and picked up the ring. As his fingers closed around it, a sense of immense power flooded through him, and he felt invincible. The ring was his, and though he told himself that he would keep it as a token of his victory, the seeds of corruption had already been sown. Thus the ring survived, and with it Sauron's spirit endured. Chapter 7. The End of the Last Alliance. The battle was won, but the victory was bittersweet. Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, was dead, and with him, the last great leader of the Noldor. Elendil, the noble King of Men, had fallen beside him, and though Sauron was defeated, the cost had been high. The armies of the last alliance returned to their homes, weary and broken. The elves, their hearts heavy with grief, withdrew from the world, retreating to their forested realms. Men, though they had won the battle, faced a future without their greatest king, and the realm of Gondor stood leaderless. Isildur, now the king of Gondor and Arnor, took the shards of Narsil and the One Ring back to his kingdom. But though he was hailed as a hero, the weight of the ring lay heavy on his heart. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over, for as long as the ring existed, Sauron's shadow would linger. And so, the tale of the last alliance came to an end. It was a story of courage and sacrifice, of unity and betrayal. Though the forces of good had triumphed, the seeds of darkness had not been fully uprooted, and the fate of Middle-earth remained uncertain. Yet from the ashes of this great battle, hope endured. For the memory of the last alliance would live on in the hearts of the free peoples of Middle-earth, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there was always light to be found. The Creation of the Elves by Ilúvatar. Chapter 1. The Music of the Ainur. Long before the world was shaped, before the stars lit the sky, and before time itself began to flow, there was Eru Ilúvatar, the One, the creator of all things. He existed alone in the timeless halls, a place beyond the boundaries of the world as we know it, filled with light and the deep silence of eternity. From his thought he brought forth the Ainur, beings of immense power and beauty, who were the first creations of his will. The Ainur were like the notes of a grand and complex symphony, each one unique, each one holding within it a part of the beauty and power of Ilúvatar's thought. They were not bound by form or substance, and they dwelled in the timeless halls, basking in the presence of Ilúvatar. Each of the Ainur had their own gifts, their own desires and dreams, all given to them by the will of Ilúvatar. But Ilúvatar had not created them to remain in the silence forever. He desired to bring into being something new, something greater than the halls in which they dwelled, a world filled with life and beauty, a place where the thoughts and dreams of the Ainur could take form. And so Ilúvatar called forth the music of the Ainur. He spoke to them, and from his words came a great and mighty theme, a melody that wove through the very fabric of existence. Ilúvatar instructed the Ainur to take up this theme, to play their parts in a grand symphony that would bring into being the world of Arda. Each Ainur took their place in the melody, and as they began to sing and play, the music of the Ainur filled the timeless halls with its beauty. At first, the music was harmonious, each note blending perfectly with the next, creating a melody of such beauty that even the Ainur marveled at it. It was a song of creation, of light and life, a vision of the world as it would one day be, filled with forests and rivers, mountains and seas, the sun and the stars. As the music swelled, Ilúvatar revealed to them the vision of Arda, the world that they were shaping with their song. But not all of the Ainur were content to follow the theme as it was given to them. Among the Ainur was Melkor, the mightiest of their number, and in his heart grew a desire for power and dominion. He wanted to shape the music according to his own will, to bend it to his desires rather than follow the theme that Ilúvatar had laid out for them. As the music played on, Melkor introduced his own discordant notes, seeking to dominate the melody with his own vision of creation. At first, the music faltered, the harmony disrupted by Melkor's rebellion. But Ilúvatar was not swayed. He smiled, and from the discord, he wove a new theme, incorporating Melkor's rebellion into the grand design of the music. The harmony returned, greater and more profound than before, for now it held within it both the light and the darkness, both creation and destruction. And so the music continued, each note shaping the world that would one day be. The Ainur, led by Ilúvatar's will, sang their parts, and together they brought forth the vision of Arda. Chapter 2. The Awakening of Arda. As the final notes of the music of the Ainur faded into silence, Ilúvatar spoke once more. "Behold the world that you have sung into being," he said. And as he spoke, the Ainur saw before them the world of Arda, newly formed and filled with promise. It was a world of great beauty, with towering mountains, vast seas and forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Ainur gazed upon it in wonder, for though they had sung its creation, they had never seen such a thing before, a world of substance, of form and matter, brought into being by their song. But this world was not yet complete. Though the mountains stood tall and the rivers flowed, there was no life, no light to fill the skies, no creatures to walk upon the earth. The world was still in its infancy, waiting for the moment when it would be filled with the children of Ilúvatar. Ilúvatar looked upon the Ainur and spoke again. "Those of you who desire it may descend into this world and shape it with your hands, to bring to fruition the vision that you have sung." Many of the Ainur chose to descend into Arda, taking upon themselves form and substance, to walk the world that they had helped create. Among them were the greatest of the Vala, Manwe, Lord of the Air, Varda, Lady of the Stars, and Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, as well as Yavanna, who would bring life to the forests and lands, and Aule, who would shape the stones and metals of the earth. These Valar, along with their lesser companions, the Maiar, began the great work of shaping Arda. They raised mountains and carved rivers, planted trees and filled the seas with life. For many ages they labored in silence, filling the world with beauty and preparing it for the coming of Ilúvatar's children. But as they worked, the shadow of Melkor grew ever stronger. Though he had been a part of the music, his rebellion had not ended with the song. He descended into Arda as well, seeking to claim it as his own. Wherever the Valar worked, Melkor sought to undo their labors, raising up mountains where they had flattened the land, filling the seas with storms and darkness. The world was filled with strife and discord as the Valar struggled against Melkor's malice. Yet despite the darkness, the Valar continued their work, for they knew that they were preparing the world for something greater, the coming of the Firstborn, the Elves. Chapter 3. The Secret Fire and the Firstborn. In the depths of the timeless halls, Ilúvatar had long held a secret in his heart, a vision that even the Ainur had not fully understood. It was the vision of the Firstborn, the Elves, the fairest and wisest of all his children, who would awaken in the starlit lands of Arda and fill the world with their beauty and song. The Valar knew of the coming of the Firstborn, but they did not know when or where they would awaken. And so they labored, preparing the world for their arrival. They planted forests of silver-leafed trees and created crystal-clear rivers that would reflect the light of the stars. Varda, the Lady of the Stars, took the brightest of the stars and placed them in the sky above Middle-earth, so that the Firstborn would awaken beneath their gentle light. For many ages, the Valar waited, tending to the world and battling against the destructive forces of Melkor. And then, one night, beneath the shimmering light of the stars, the Firstborn awakened. They awoke by the shores of Cuiviénen, the Water of Awakening, a peaceful lake nestled in the easternmost lands of Middle-earth. The first elves opened their eyes to the sight of the stars reflected in the still waters, and they rose from the earth, filled with wonder and awe at the beauty of the world around them. They were tall and graceful, their eyes bright with the light of the stars, their hearts filled with the song of the world that had been sung into being by the Ainur. The elves were the first to walk the lands of Middle-earth, the Firstborn of Ilúvatar, and they were destined to live forever, their lives bound to the very fate of the world itself. They wandered through the forests and over the hills, exploring the new world they had been born into, their voices rising in song as they marveled at the beauty of the stars above. For a time the elves lived in peace, unaware of the darkness that lurked beyond the edges of their starlit world. But Melkor, ever watchful, had seen their awakening, and he coveted them for his own. He sought to corrupt them, to twist their hearts and turn them away from Ilúvatar's light. Chapter 4. The Call of the Valar. When the Valar learned that the elves had awakened, they were filled with joy. For many ages they had awaited this moment, and now at last the Firstborn walked upon the earth. Manwë, the Lord of the Air, called a great council of the Valar, and they gathered to discuss how best to protect the elves from the darkness that still lingered in the world. "Melkor's shadow is ever growing," said Manwë, his deep voice filled with concern. "We must act swiftly to protect the Firstborn from his malice." Varda, the Lady of the Stars, nodded in agreement. "I will place even more stars in the sky to guide them and keep them safe from the darkness. But we must do more." Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, spoke then. "Let us call the elves to Valinor, the blessed realm, where they will be safe from Melkor's reach. In our lands they will live in peace, and we can teach them the wisdom of the ages." The Valar agreed, and so they sent forth a messenger to the elves, inviting them to come to Valinor, where they would dwell in the light of the two trees, the greatest of all the creations of the Valar. But the journey to Valinor was long and filled with peril, and not all of the elves were willing to leave the lands of Middle-earth. 3 ambassadors were chosen to journey to Valinor and return with news of its wonders. Ingwe, Finwe, and Elwe were the leaders of the 3 great clans of the elves, and they were the first to set foot in the Blessed Realm. When they beheld the light of the 2 trees, their hearts were filled with awe, for the light of the trees was greater than even the stars, and they knew that Valinor was a place of peace and beauty beyond anything they had ever imagined. When they returned to their people, they spoke of the wonders of Valinor, and many of the elves chose to follow them to the Blessed Realm. But not all were willing to leave the starlit lands of Middle-earth. Some, like the Avari, the unwilling, chose to remain behind, preferring the lands they had first awakened in to the unknown realm of the Valar. Thus began the great journey of the elves, as they travelled across the vast lands of Middle-earth, guided by the light of the stars and the Valar. It was a journey filled with both wonder and hardship, for though the Valar had called them to safety, the shadows of Melkor still lurked in the world, seeking to corrupt the hearts of the Firstborn. Chapter 5. The Sundering of the Elves. The journey to Valinor was long and fraught with peril, and along the way the elves became divided. The 3 great clans, the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri, each followed their own paths, and as the journey continued, some of the elves chose to remain behind in Middle-earth. The Vanyar, led by Ingwe, were the first to reach Valinor. They were the most devoted to the Valar, and they embraced the light of the 2 trees with all their hearts. In Valinor, they lived in peace, their voices filling the air with song as they praised the beauty of the world. The Noldor, led by Finwe, followed close behind. They were a people of great skill and wisdom, known for their craftsmanship and their thirst for knowledge. In Valinor, they built great cities, filled with wonders beyond imagining, and they delved deep into the mysteries of the world. But the Teleri, led by Elwe and Olwe, were slower to make the journey. They loved the seas and the rivers of Middle-earth, and many of them chose to remain by the shores, their hearts filled with the song of the waves. Elwe, in particular, was captivated by the beauty of Middle-earth, and it was there, in the forests of Beleriand, that he met Melian, a Maya of great power and beauty. Together they founded the kingdom of Doriath, where Elwe, now known as Thingol, became a great king. And so the elves were sundered, divided by their choices and their love for the different lands of Arda. Some remained in Middle-earth, content to live beneath the stars, while others journeyed to Valinor, where they lived in the light of the 2 trees, safe from the shadows of Melkor. Chapter 6. Melkor's Influence. Though many of the elves had found peace in Valinor, the shadow of Melkor still lingered. The Dark Lord, though imprisoned by the Valar for a time, was eventually released, and he returned to the Blessed Realm with feigned repentance. But in his heart, Melkor still harbored a desire for power, and he sought to corrupt the hearts of the elves, especially the Noldor, who were proud and ambitious. Melkor whispered lies into the ears of the Noldor, sowing seeds of discord and jealousy. He told them that the Valar kept them in Valinor to control them, that they were being denied their rightful place as rulers of Middle-earth. These lies took root in the heart of Feanor, the greatest of the Noldor, who had created the Silmarils, 3 jewels that contained the light of the 2 trees. The desire for power and dominion consumed Feanor, and when Melkor stole the Silmarils and fled to Middle-earth, Feanor led the Noldor in a great rebellion, swearing an oath to pursue Melkor and reclaim the Silmarils at any cost. Thus began the long and tragic history of the elves, as they pursued their lost jewels, driven by pride and vengeance. Chapter 7. The Beginning of All Things. And so the elves, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, came into the world. They were a people of great beauty, wisdom and skill, but their history was one of both light and darkness. From their awakening beneath the stars to their sundering and their battles against Melkor, the story of the elves was filled with both triumph and tragedy. Yet through it all, the elves remained true to the light of Ilúvatar, their hearts ever filled with the beauty of the world they had been born into. They were the first to walk upon the earth, the first to hear the song of creation, and their legacy would endure for all the ages of the world. As the tale of the creation of the elves comes to a close, rest now, dear listener. Let the light of the stars guide you into a peaceful sleep, and know that the beauty of the firstborn lives on in every leaf, every stream, and every gentle breeze that whispers through the trees. The Departure to the Undying Lands. Chapter 1. The Weight of Ages. The golden light of the fading sun bathed the shores of Middle-earth in a gentle glow, casting long shadows over the white sands. The waves rolled in, their soft, rhythmic whispers carrying the memories of countless ages. As the tide ebbed and flowed, so too did the history of the elves, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, who had once walked the land in great numbers, but were now few and scattered. Middle-earth was no longer as it once was. The world had changed, its ancient forests diminished, its once glorious cities lying in ruins. The time of men had come, and the elves, who had long stood as stewards of beauty and wisdom, knew that their place in the world was drawing to an end. The weight of ages lay heavily upon them, for though they were immortal, the passage of time had wearied their hearts. For many years, the elves had remained in Middle-earth, despite the call of the Undying Lands, the blessed realm of Valinor, where no shadow could touch them, and where the light of the two trees still shone in their memory. Valinor was a place of peace and eternal beauty, where the Valar, the great powers of the world, dwelled. It was a sanctuary for the elves, a place where they could live out their endless days in harmony, far from the grief and sorrow that had come to plague Middle-earth. But for many ages the elves had lingered in the mortal world, bound by their love for the lands they had helped shape and protect. They had fought in great wars, stood against the might of Morgoth and Sauron, and had seen the rise and fall of countless kingdoms. Their songs and stories were woven into the very fabric of the world, and they had left their mark on every corner of Middle-earth. Now, however, the time had come for them to leave. Chapter 2. The Call of the Sea. The call of the sea, the deep, resonant pull of the west, had always been present in the hearts of the elves, but for many it had been easy to ignore. The forests of Lothlorien, the halls of Rivendell, and the hidden refuges of Lindon had been places of great beauty and peace, and the elves had found comfort in these sanctuaries. Yet, over time, even the most beautiful of lands could not keep the longing at bay. It was not a sound that could be heard with the ears, but a song that resonated deep within the soul, a quiet but persistent melody that called to them from across the sea. It was the voice of Valinor, the blessed realm, beckoning them home. For those who had lived for countless millennia, the call grew stronger with each passing year, filling them with a deep sense of yearning, a longing for the light of the two trees, for the eternal peace that only Valinor could offer. Círdan the shipwright, the wisest and oldest of all the elves who remained in Middle-earth, had long felt the call of the sea. He dwelled in the Grey Havens, a haven of quiet beauty on the western shores, where he had built ships for those who wished to make the journey to Valinor. His hands, skilled and patient, had crafted many vessels, each one designed to carry its passengers across the sundering seas to the lands that lay beyond the reach of mortal men. Círdan had never sailed himself. Though the call of the sea was strong within him, he had remained in Middle-earth, waiting for the time when his task would be complete. But now, as the age of the elves drew to a close, he knew that the time of his departure was near. The ships he had built lay ready in the harbour, their sails unfurled, waiting to carry the last of the Eldar to the Undying lands. Among those preparing for the journey were Elrond, the Lord of Rivendell, and Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlorien. Both had seen many ages pass, and both had borne the weight of countless sorrows. They had fought against the darkness of Sauron, had witnessed the fall of kingdoms, and had said farewell to many friends. Now, at last, they too would depart, leaving behind the lands they had loved and protected for so long. But for each of them, the decision to leave was not without pain. Chapter 3. Farewells in Rivendell. The autumn leaves drifted down from the golden trees of Rivendell, carried on the gentle breeze that whispered through the valley. The sound of the river flowing through the rocks was a constant companion, its soft murmur filling the air with a sense of peace. Rivendell, the last homely house, had been a refuge for many, a place of healing, of knowledge, and of song. Elrond had ruled here for countless years, offering sanctuary to all who needed it. Now the time had come for him to leave. Elrond stood on the balcony of his home, gazing out at the valley he had loved for so long. His heart was heavy with the weight of parting, for though he knew the journey to Valinor was one he must make, it meant leaving behind all that he had built and cared for in Middle-earth. The halls of Rivendell had been filled with laughter and song, with stories told around the fire, and with the faces of those he had loved. But those days were fading. The world was changing, and Elrond knew that his place was no longer in Middle-earth. His children, Arwen, Elladan, and Elrohir, were grown, and his duties to the world of men were complete. Yet, parting with his daughter, Arwen, was a sorrow he could scarcely bear. Arwen had chosen a mortal life, choosing love over immortality. She would remain in Middle-earth with her husband, Aragorn, the King of Gondor. It was a choice that Elrond had struggled to accept, for it meant that he would not see his daughter again, not in Valinor, not beyond the circles of the world. His heart ached at the thought, for though he had lived for countless ages, the pain of losing a loved one was as sharp as any wound. As Elrond prepared for the journey, he said his farewells to those who remained in Rivendell. The valley that had once been filled with the voices of the elves now seemed quiet, almost empty. Many of the Eldar had already sailed west, leaving behind only a few who lingered for a while longer. Elrond's heart was filled with gratitude for the years he had spent here, for the memories he would carry with him across the sea. On the morning of his departure, Elrond stood on the shores of the river that had long flowed through his lands, its waters cool and clear. He cast a final glance at the valley, taking in every detail, every leaf, every stone. With a deep breath, he turned toward the west, where the sea awaited him. Chapter 4. The Grey Havens. The Grey Havens lay bathed in the soft light of twilight, the last rays of the sun reflecting off the gentle waves that lapped at the shore. The harbour was quiet, save for the sound of the wind in the sails of the waiting ships, their white hulls gleaming against the pale sky. The ships of the elves were unlike any other. Crafted with care and skill by Círdan himself, they were designed to bear their passengers across the sundering seas, to the lands beyond the reach of time and death. As the time of departure drew near, many elves gathered at the havens. Some had already made the journey, sailing west in earlier years, but now those who remained were preparing to leave as well. Among them were the most ancient and wise of their kind, those who had seen the world in its earliest days, who had walked beneath the stars before the sun and moon had risen. Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlorien, stood among them. She had lived for many ages, and her wisdom was unparalleled among the Eldar. She had seen both the light and the darkness of the world, had borne the weight of the One Ring, and had fought against the forces of Sauron. Now, at last, she was ready to return to the lands from which she had come so long ago. Galadriel's heart was heavy with the weight of all that she had seen and experienced in Middle-earth. The forests of Lothlorien, which she had tended with such care, would fade without her presence. The golden leaves would fall, and the light of the trees would grow dim. Yet she knew that it was time. The world of men had come, and the elves were no longer needed in Middle-earth. Beside her stood Elrond, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The two of them, who had seen so much and carried so many burdens, were now preparing to leave the world they had fought to protect. There was a sense of quiet understanding between them, for they knew that this journey marked the end of an era, the end of the age of the elves in Middle-earth. As they stood on the shore watching the waves roll in, they were joined by others, elves who had lived in Middle-earth for countless years, who had loved the land and its people, but who now felt the pull of the West. They spoke in soft voices, their words carried on the wind as they prepared for the journey to the Undying lands. Chapter 5. The journey begins. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sea, the time of departure finally arrived. The elves boarded their ships, their footsteps light on the wooden decks, their hearts filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. For though they were leaving behind all that they had known and loved in Middle-earth, they were also returning to a place of peace and eternal light, a place where no shadow could touch them. Círdan, the shipwright, stood at the helm of the lead ship, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had built these vessels with his own hands, and he knew that this was the last journey he would ever make. The sea had always been his true home, and now at last he would sail its endless waters, guided by the light of the stars. Elrond, Galadriel, and the others took their places on the ships. Their eyes turned westward. The sails caught the wind, and the ships began to move, gliding gracefully across the water. The sound of the waves filled the air, a soft and steady rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the world itself. As the ships sailed further from the shore, the land of Middle-earth grew smaller and smaller in the distance. The mountains and forests, the rivers and valleys that they had known for so long, faded into the mist until they were no more than a memory. For those who sailed, there was a sense of both loss and relief. Middle-earth, with all its beauty and sorrow, was behind them now. Ahead lay Valinor, the Undying lands, where the light of the two trees still shone, and where the elves would find rest from their long labours. Chapter 6. The Blessed Realm. As the ship sailed on, the air grew lighter, and the scent of the sea was filled with a sweetness that had not been present before. The sky, once filled with the stars of Middle-earth, now glowed with a soft, ethereal light, a light that came not from the sun or moon, but from the lands that lay ahead. Valinor, the Blessed Realm, was drawing near. The elves stood on the decks of the ships, their hearts filled with anticipation. For many, it had been countless ages since they had last seen the shores of Valinor, and for others, like Elrond, it was the first time they would set foot in the Undying lands. But for all of them, there was a sense of peace, a quiet joy that filled their souls as they approached their new home. The shores of Valinor appeared on the horizon, bathed in a golden light. The white sands gleamed like pearls, and the green hills beyond were dotted with trees that shimmered with a light of their own. The air was filled with the sound of birdsong, and the scent of flowers drifted on the breeze. It was a place of perfect peace, untouched by the shadow of darkness. As the ships drew closer to the shore, the elves felt a great sense of relief wash over them. They had finally come home. Chapter 7. The End of the Journey. When the ships reached the shores of Valinor, the elves disembarked, their feet touching the white sands of the Blessed Realm. They were greeted by the Valar, the great powers who had shaped the world, and by the elves who had long dwelled in Valinor, living in the light of the two trees. There were no words spoken, for none were needed. The elves had come home, and the peace of the Undying lands filled their hearts. As they walked through the fields of Valinor, beneath the light of the two trees, the elves felt the weight of the ages lift from their shoulders. The sorrow and grief they had carried with them from Middle-earth faded, replaced by a sense of eternal joy. They had lived through countless battles, had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, and had borne the weight of many sorrows. But now, at last, they could rest. The light of Valinor was warm and comforting, and the elves knew that they would never again have to face the darkness that had plagued Middle-earth. They were home, and the peace they had long sought was now theirs. And so the age of the elves in Middle-earth came to an end. The shores of the Undying lands welcomed the Firstborn, and their journey, which had begun beneath the stars of Cuiviénen, was finally complete.